Thank you for joining the session Best Practices for Testing Microservices. My name is Mustafa. I have over 20 plus years of experience. In the most recent projects, I have been involved in migrating monolithic legacy applications to microservices. And I would like to share some of the best practices which I learned during this journey. Here is the high level agenda which we will be following. So, we will be talking about microservice architecture, we will be talking about some of the benefits of microservices and what are some of the QA challenges in microservices, and then what is the strategy to do QA in microservices, and then some of the most common uh, tool sets in microservices. And then if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer those. So, as I mentioned that in the monolithic architecture, the user interface, the business logic, and data access layer is very tightly integrated. So, whenever you have a new release, you have to make sure that you do a complete regression uh, testing to make sure that nothing else is broken. Uh, that is not the case in the microservices architecture, because in the microservices architecture, um, each service is behaving independently. So the benefit is that even if I am working on one service and my colleague is working on another service, we can both work completely independently. And when I am finished with my microservice development, I can go through the unit testing, integration testing, contract testing, and then I can deploy my service in the QA environment. So why transition from monolithic to microservices? It gives you resilience, it gives you scalability, it is agile, it is replaceability, and it is easy to be deployed. So, what are some of the challenges in testing microservices? Now, if I am working on a service and my colleague is also working on another service, so he might not be finished, but I'm finished. So I cannot, uh, if I want to test my service and my dependence is on that other service, and if he's not ready, then I cannot test my service. So I think this is one of the challenges, but I mean, there is a solution to it, and we will be going through that. Availability of testing environment. So I mean, as you know, that we have one QA environment. If I am currently working on that environment with my settings, and if somebody else also want that same environment, so how do you, how do you do that? Now, because each service is working independently, it has its own logs, it has its own database. So, how do you access the? I mean, access to get all that logs and database is a challenge. And then the I mean complexity increases because now you in the monolithic environment you have only one database, but out here you have multiple databases, multiple log files. So and the issue can happen in a multiple, and that is not the scenario in the monolithic API where you have only one database. And then in the monolithic, you because you have the I mean scope identification is easy. Out here, you have individual services. So to create the test cases at each level, you have to really focus on that. And then finally, each service is working separately. So I mean, it has its own architecture. So that is something which you have to keep in mind. So before I go to the QA strategies for microservices, I want to take a simple scenario. In this scenario, I have a simple e-commerce site. This e-commerce site is created using microservices. It has seven microservices in it. It has a front end microservice, order, payment, user microservice, catalog, cart, and shipping. Now, our goal is to make sure that all of these individual microservices are working properly, whatever services they provide. And plus, we want to make sure that the end to end, all of these microservices are working together also properly. So I think this is so. How do we achieve that? So this is what the different Microsoft services testing types are: unit testing, integration, contract, and then end-to-end. So we will start with unit testing and will we go all the way up. So what do we do in the unit testing? So in the unit testing, if we go back to our sample e-commerce application, we will take one of the microservices. In this scenario, we will take the order microservice, and the order microservice will have different um, functionalities, right? So we will go through each of the functionalities and we will verify. We will not worry about, integration and the, end to end. My goal in the unit testing is to make sure that all the classes in that particular microservice are working properly. And I'm not even concerned about how this microservice is integrating with any third party resources. So in this unit testing, I will be just focused on the individual functionalities of that particular microservice. If that microservice is, let's say, if it is a payment microservice and it has to get some input from a third party Visa card or MasterCard gateway, then I will mock that service up. So I will isolate the logic in places where setting up all the cases and covering edge scenarios is much easier than at a service level. Internal dependencies are stubbed and mocked. So this is what I am talking about when I discuss about mocking up the MasterCard and the Visa card service in my payment microservice. And all the non-functional requirements such as the end user authentication, throttling, monitoring are implemented at each and every microservices level. So we will be verifying all of these in the unit testing. Then we go from the unit testing to the integration testing. In the integration testing, we are not worried about the individual classes functionality. We want to make sure that the interface from my microservice. So in this scenario, if I have a microservice, a payment microservice, and um it is integrating with the payment gateway MasterCard. So I want to make sure in this integration testing that for my microservice, when I send a request to the MasterCard gateway, I'm getting the proper response back. So in this cycle, in the previous cycle unit testing, I was just concerned about all the functionalities within the microservices are working. Now in the integration testing, I am more concerned about the um, all the external services which I am talking to from my microservices. They are working properly. Okay, so the second cycle is the integration cycle. So in this integration cycle, we verify communication path and interaction between component to defect interface defect, a critical part of testing microservices for proper inter-service communication. And we make sure that the data store and the external components are working properly. Okay. So now we will move to the third part of the microservices, which is called contract testing. So coming back to our example of the e-commerce application. So let's say that I want to verify that my front end microservice is working properly. So in this example, what I will now the front end microservice works with all of the other microservices. So in this example, what we will make sure that when the front end microservice works with the other microservice, the request and response which it is expecting, that is working in accordance to what it should be. So if I go to the example, so if you see out here that it basically there is individual microservices signatures. So it basically verifies that the endpoints which my front end microservices will be talking to all the other microservices, they are working properly. So in this contract testing, we verify that the endpoint are working properly. And I mean, each service, like I mentioned, is I mean treated as a black box. So I don't. I have basically mocked all the other services which my uh, microservices is talking to, and I am just concerned about the endpoints. So if I request something, I'm getting back the response properly, and I am validating that. And I mean, there are a lot of tools available to do that. And I mean, we will be talking about some of the tools shortly on this. And finally, I mean, like, after we do go through the contract testing, the final testing for is the end-to-end testing. So what we do in the end-to-end testing is that if I am the in this end-to-end testing, we basically mock all the external services, and we make sure that all of our services are working properly all of our microservices are working properly. And I mean, in this situation, we are not using any mock services. These are actual microservices. So in the end-to-end testing verifies entire process flow correctly, including all services and all DB integrations. More business facing due to black box mechanism. Verifies environment setup, configuration, firewall policies, proxies, and load balance configuration. So this is the last end of my uh, testing cycle, and it basically ensures complete correctness and health of the application. Here are some of the most common tools. So for the API testing, we use SOAP UI, Rest Assured, Postman. For the contract testing, which we mentioned, where we mock all these services, uh, Pact is a very common one which a lot of companies use with. Besides Pact, there is Practo and Janus. And then for performance, that all these microservices are responding back in the right time frame. Apache JMeter is used. I mean, these are all open source tools, um, and they are very popularly used in most of the microservices QA. Um, Thank you so much, everybody, for joining this call.